Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today for this deep dive on a topic I think you're really going to find interesting.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
We're going to be taking a look at the racial wealth gap in America.
Okay.
We got some excerpts here from a recent report on the racial wealth gap, and we're going to try to understand some of the reasons why Black individuals often earn less
Right.
than other racial groups in the U.S.
Yeah.
So are you ready to get started?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a really important topic, and there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, for sure. One of the first things that jumped out at me in this report was the statistic on median net worth.
Okay.
It said that white households have 10 times
Wow.
the net worth of Black households.
Yeah, that's not a typo.
10 times. Yeah.
That's a big difference.
That's a huge difference.
Mhm.
So, yeah, that's something I really want to dig into today and kind of try to understand better.
Yeah, I think it's a good place to start. It's easy to just say, oh, it's financial literacy.
Right.
But I think there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, actually, this report does talk about financial literacy.
Oh.
It mentions this thing called the Personal Finance Index,
Okay, yeah.
which tested financial knowledge across different racial groups.
Mm.
And I was wondering if anything in particular stood out to you from those findings.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the fact that only 28% of African Americans
Wow.
could answer over half of the questions correctly is concerning.
Yeah.
That suggests that there's a real gap in terms of access to financial education
Right.
and resources.
Yeah.
And I think, it's really important to emphasize here that it's not about individuals being bad with money.
Right.
It's about the system that they're navigating.
Yeah, and actually the report goes on to highlight
Okay.
some specific areas where this gap in financial literacy is most pronounced.
Yeah.
Things like insurance, understanding
Mm-hmm.
risk,
Mm-hmm.
investing,
Mm.
and even just knowing where to find reliable financial information.
Right. If you don't know where to look, how are you going to learn?
Exactly, yeah.
It's like trying to learn a new language without a dictionary or a teacher.
Right.
You're kind of set up to fail.
Yeah, and that lack of foundational knowledge
Yeah,
can really have a ripple effect across generations.
absolutely.
Which brings us to something else that this report really highlights.
Okay.
Generational wealth. One statistic that I found really striking was that only 14% of Black individuals reported receiving any kind of parental help
Wow.
for college expenses,
Yeah,
compared to much higher rates for other groups.
that's a huge difference. And, think about what that means for the people who did get help.
Right.
They're starting off with a huge advantage
Yeah.
right out of the gate. It's not just about tuition. It's about, the freedom to focus on your studies,
Mhm.
maybe take an unpaid internship, build your career without being crippled by debt.
Yeah.
And that early support can make a huge difference in terms of your job prospects, your earning potential, and ultimately, your ability to build wealth.
Absolutely. And it's not just about getting a degree.
Right.
Right. This report also found that Black parents are less likely to be able to help their kids with things like a down payment on a house.
Yeah. And without that initial boost, homeownership becomes much harder.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, that's one of the main ways that they build wealth.
Right.
So it creates this cycle that can be incredibly difficult to break.
Yeah, it's like starting a race 100 yards behind everybody else.
Exactly.
And so even if you work hard and get a good education,
Mm-hmm.
that initial disadvantage
Yeah,
can really cast a long shadow.
absolutely. And that shadow extends into the workplace too.
Well, that's what I want to talk about next, because the report had some interesting data on education and employment.
Okay.
And one thing that I found kind of surprising was that even when Black men reach executive positions,
Mm-hmm.
there's still a pay gap.
Yeah.
The report said they earn 97 cents for every dollar earned by a white man with the same qualifications.
Unfortunately, that's a problem that we see again and again. And
Yeah.
it's not just about individuals being undervalued,
Right.
The report also talks about this concept of occupational segregation,
Okay.
which basically means that Black workers are often concentrated in lower paying industries.
Can you give an example of what that might look like in the real world?
Sure, think about fields like social work or education,
Okay.
critically important jobs,
Yeah.
but often they're not very well paid.
Right.
And the report shows that Black men are overrepresented in these types of roles.
So even if you make it to the top of your field, the field itself might be part of the problem.
That's one way to look at it. And I think this is where the conversation starts to get even more complex,
Yeah.
because we have to start considering the historical context that led to this occupational segregation in the first place.
Right.
We can't talk about the racial wealth gap without acknowledging the systemic barriers and discrimination that have shaped the playing field.
That's a great point, and this report doesn't shy away from that historical context,
Good.
especially when it comes to housing. There's a whole section on redlining, which honestly sounds kind of horrifying.
It was, imagine entire neighborhoods being deemed hazardous for loans
Wow.
simply because of the racial makeup of the residents.
It's hard to believe that that actually happened.
It did, and the effects are still being felt today.
Really?
This report cites data showing that black applicants are nearly twice as likely to be denied a mortgage
Oh, wow.
than white applicants.
So even if you have the income and the credit score,
Yeah.
you're still facing a higher hurdle because of these historical practices.
That's what the data suggests, and it's not just redlining.
Okay.
The report also mentions the GI Bill,
Oh, right.
which was designed to help veterans after World War II,
Yeah.
but it was often implemented in a way that disadvantaged black veterans.
So even a program that was meant to benefit veterans was skewed against black people.
Exactly. And there are a lot of examples of this.
Yeah.
Local officials often had discretion over who received loans or educational benefits,
Okay.
and they frequently favored white applicants.
So it's almost like systemic bias was baked into the very system
Mm-hmm.
that was supposed to help level the playing field.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought, and it really illustrates how deeply ingrained these inequities are.
And how difficult it is to overcome them, even with education and hard work.
Exactly. We've talked about financial literacy and generational wealth,
Right.
but these systemic barriers add another layer of complexity.
It's clear we need to dig deeper into this historical context if we want to truly understand the scope of the problem.
I agree.
And that's exactly what we'll do when we come back after a quick break. So we were talking about how historical practices like redlining have impacted the racial wealth gap.
Right.
But this report goes deeper
Mm-hmm.
and mentions the GI Bill,
Okay.
the program designed to help veterans after World War II,
Yeah.
and how its implementation actually kind of widened the gap.
It's a classic example, I think, of
Yeah.
how a policy that's seemingly, positive can have these unintended consequences,
Right.
especially when you have racial bias kind of woven into the system.
Yeah, the report mentions that local officials had a lot of power in deciding who received these benefits.
Yeah.
Were they just like turning away black veterans outright?
I mean, sometimes it was that blatant,
Why?
but a lot of times it was a lot more subtle.
Mhm.
They would steer black veterans toward vocational training instead of college,
Oh, wow.
or deny them loans for homes in predominantly white neighborhoods.
So they were being denied opportunities to build wealth
Exactly.
through higher education and home ownership.
Right. And that just further solidified the existing economic disparities.
It's almost like a double whammy,
Yeah.
First denied opportunities during the war
Right.
and then denied the benefits that were designed to help them catch up afterward.
Exactly. And these historical disadvantages have this domino effect.
Okay.
Without the same access to education, housing capital,
Right.
black families were less likely to accumulate wealth.
Yeah.
And then that lack of wealth gets passed down to subsequent generations.
Right.
Which brings us back to the generational wealth gap that we were talking about earlier.
So it's not just about individual choices
Right.
or financial savvy.
It's bigger than that.
The system itself was kind of rigged from the start.
Yeah, and it's important to understand that these historical injustices are still playing out in the present.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
For example, the report cites a study that found that even when you control for things like income and credit score,
Okay.
black mortgage applicants are still more likely to be denied than white applicants.
It's unbelievable you're telling me that even today in 2025,
Yeah.
the ghosts of redlining are still haunting the housing market.
I mean, that's what the data suggests, and it's not just mortgages.
Okay.
The report also highlights disparities in access to small business loans,
Oh, right.
which, makes it harder for black entrepreneurs to start and grow businesses.
Limiting job creation
Yeah,
within those communities.
and hindering the circulation of wealth.
Right.
It's all connected.
Yeah. So we're seeing how this lack of access to capital,
Yeah.
rooted in historical discrimination,
Mm-hmm.
continues to perpetuate this racial wealth gap.
It's a complex web of interconnected factors.
Yeah.
And I think to really grasp the scope of the problem, we need to kind of shift gears a little bit
Okay.
and look at the consequences of limited financial education,
Right.
particularly for those who are already facing these systemic barriers.
All right, let's talk about that.
Okay.
The report had some pretty sobering statistics about financial literacy within the black community.
Yeah, one finding that really jumped out at me was that 60% of African Americans who scored poorly on financial literacy tests
Hmm.
couldn't come up with $2,000 for an emergency.
That's terrifying,
Yeah.
especially when you consider the lack of generational wealth and the historical barriers that we've been talking about.
Right. It creates this perfect storm
Yeah.
for financial instability.
So this lack of financial literacy isn't just about, making smart investments or planning for retirement.
Right.
It's about basic survival.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
It's about having the knowledge and the skills to navigate a financial system that's often stacked against you.
Right.
It's about being able to weather those inevitable financial storms
Yeah.
without, completely losing your footing.
And without that foundational knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes even harder to build that long-term wealth and security.
Exactly. And, the implications go far beyond individual well-being.
Right.
This financial fragility ripples outward.
Right.
It impacts families, communities, ultimately the entire economy.
So it's in everybody's best interest to address these disparities
Yeah, I think so.
and create a more equitable financial landscape.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've laid out the problem here in pretty stark terms.
Right.
But what about solutions?
Yeah.
This report doesn't just leave us hanging, does it?
No, it does offer some potential avenues for addressing this issue.
Okay.
And, while there's no single magic bullet,
Right.
it really emphasizes the need for a multifaceted approach that tackles both the historical injustices and the present-day barriers.
I'm curious to hear what that looks like.
Well, one key area the report focuses on is policy reform.
Okay.
We need policies that promote equitable access to education, housing, and financial services.
Can you give me some concrete examples of what that might look like?
Absolutely. Think about investing in early childhood education programs,
Okay.
particularly in underserved communities.
Yeah.
This not only gives children a strong foundation for future success,
Right.
but it also helps working parents,
Okay.
allowing them to focus on their careers and improve their own financial stability.
That makes sense. What about housing?
Yeah.
We talked about the lasting impact of redlining.
Mm-hmm.
How do we move past that?
Well, the report suggests expanding affordable housing options
Okay.
and strengthening enforcement of fair lending practices.
Okay.
So this could involve, incentivizing the development of affordable housing in higher income neighborhoods, providing down payment assistance to first-time home buyers, and cracking down on discriminatory lending practices that still exist today.
So it sounds like we need a multi-pronged approach
Yeah.
to make home ownership a reality
Right.
for more people, especially those who have been historically excluded.
Exactly. And we can't forget about the role of employment.
Right.
The report advocates for policies that ensure equal pay for equal work.
Okay.
And create pathways for Black individuals to advance in their careers,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in fields where they're currently underrepresented.
We touched on occupational segregation earlier.
Yeah.
Are there specific strategies to address that?
There are. Think about mentorship programs
That's
that
okay.
connect Black professionals with experienced mentors in their fields,
Right.
or apprenticeship programs that provide hands-on training and pathways to higher-paying jobs.
So we need to create a system
Yeah.
where talent and hard work are rewarded, regardless of race or background.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to financial literacy, which this report really emphasizes as being critical for individual empowerment.
Yeah. What are some ways to improve access to financial education?
Well, I think we need to start early.
Okay.
Integrating financial literacy into school curriculums
Mm-hmm.
from elementary school all the way through high school
Yeah.
would equip young people with the foundational knowledge they need to make smart financial decisions throughout their lives.
I wish I had learned more about managing money in school.
Me too.
It would have saved me a lot of headaches.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that way. And it's not just about, teaching kids how to balance a checkbook.
Yep.
It's about helping them understand credit debt investing,
Yeah.
the importance of long-term financial planning.
So it's about giving them the tools
Yeah.
to build a solid financial future.
Exactly. But what about adults who maybe missed out on that early education?
Okay, that's a good point.
There are resources for them too. Community centers, libraries, even online platforms can offer workshops and courses
Yeah.
tailored to different needs and learning styles.
Okay.
Financial counseling services can also provide personalized guidance and support.
Right.
Helping individuals create budgets, manage debt, work towards their financial goals.
So it's about creating a network of support and resources
Yeah.
that's accessible to everyone.
Exactly. But, it's not just about government programs and educational initiatives.
Right.
We all have a role to play in creating a more equitable society.
What are some things that individuals can do, even on a small scale?
Well, supporting Black-owned businesses is a great place to start.
Okay.
They can provide access to that directly injects capital into Black communities
Right.
and helps foster economic growth.
It's about being mindful of where
Yeah.
we spend our money
Mhm.
and who we support.
Exactly. You can also, seek out Black professionals,
Oh, right.
doctors, lawyers, accountants, when
Yeah.
you need those services.
Makes sense.
These small choices can make a big difference.
What about engaging with our communities? Are there
Yeah.
ways to kind of get involved on a local level?
Absolutely. Volunteer your time or donate to organizations that are working to address the racial wealth gap. Support initiatives that promote affordable housing,
Mhm.
educational equity, job creation within Black communities.
Okay.
Attend town hall meetings, advocate for policies that promote racial justice and economic empowerment.
It sounds like there are countless ways to make a difference,
There are.
whether it's through our spending habits,
Yeah.
our volunteer efforts,
Mhm.
or our political engagement.
Exactly. And, don't underestimate the power of conversation.
Oh, that's a good point.
Talking about these issues with friends, family, colleagues
Right.
helps raise awareness and can inspire others to take action.
It all comes back to that idea of collective action,
hmm
recognizing that we're all part of the solution.
We are, addressing the racial wealth gap requires a shift in mindset,
Okay.
a commitment to understanding the historical context,
Mhm.
acknowledging the systemic barriers, and working together to create a more just and equitable future.
This has been incredibly insightful,
Good.
and I think we've only scratched the surface of this complex issue.
We have, but I hope this conversation has at least provided a framework
Yeah.
for understanding the historical and systemic factors that contribute to the racial wealth gap, as well as, some potential pathways towards a more just and equitable future.
I agree. It's a journey that requires ongoing learning,
Yeah,
reflection, and action,
absolutely.
and we're not done yet.
Right.
When we come back, we'll delve deeper into some specific actions we can all take to address this issue.
Looking forward to it.
All right, so we're back, and we've been having this really insightful conversation about the racial wealth gap,
Yeah.
exploring its historical roots,
Mhm.
the systemic barriers that still persist today.
Right.
It can feel kind of overwhelming, to be honest.
It can.
But, th- this report doesn't just point out the problems.
Right.
It also offers some potential solutions.
It does, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really curious to kind of dive into that.
Okay.
What are some tangible steps
Yeah.
that we can actually take to address this issue?
Well, the report really highlights the crucial role of policy reform.
Okay.
We need policies that actively promote equal access
Right.
to education, housing, and financial services.
Can you give me some concrete examples of what that might look like?
Sure. Think about investing in early childhood education programs,
Okay.
particularly in underserved communities.
Mm-hmm.
This not only gives children a strong foundation, for future success,
Right.
but it also really helps working parents.
Yeah,
Allows them to focus on their careers, maybe improve their own financial stability.
that makes sense. What about housing?
Yeah.
We talked about the lasting impact of redlining. How do we move past that?
Well, the report suggests expanding affordable housing options
Okay.
and strengthening enforcement of fair lending practices. So this could involve incentivizing the development of affordable housing in higher income neighborhoods,
Right.
providing down payment assistance to first-time homebuyers, and cracking down on discriminatory lending practices that I think we can all agree still exist today.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like we need that multi-pronged approach
We do.
to make homeownership a reality for more people, especially those who have been historically excluded.
Exactly. And, and we can't forget about the role of employment.
Right.
The report advocates for policies that ensure equal pay for equal work
Okay.
and create pathways for Black individuals to really advance in their careers,
Right.
particularly in those fields where they're currently underrepresented.
We touched on occupational segregation earlier.
Yeah,
Are there specific strategies to address that?
there are. Think about mentorship programs
Okay.
that connect Black professionals with experienced mentors in their field,
Right.
or apprenticeship programs that provide hands-on training and pathways to those higher-paying jobs.
Yeah. So we need to create a system
Yeah.
where talent and hard work are rewarded, regardless of race or background.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to financial literacy,
Right.
which this report, really emphasizes as being so critical for individual empowerment.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some ways to improve access to financial education?
Well, I think we need to start early.
Okay.
Integrating financial literacy into school curriculums from elementary school all the way through high school
Mm-hmm.
would equip young people with that, foundational knowledge they need to make
Yeah.
smart financial decisions
Yeah.
throughout their lives.
I wish I had learned more about managing money in school.
I think a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah.
And it's not just about teaching kids how to balance a checkbook or something.
Right.
It's about helping them understand credit debt investing,
Mm.
the importance of long-term financial planning.
Yeah. So it's about giving them those tools
Yeah.
to build a solid financial future.
Exactly. But what about adults who may have missed out on that early education?
That's a great point.
There are resources out there for them too.
Okay.
Community centers, libraries, even online platforms
Right.
can offer workshops and courses
Mm.
tailored to different needs and learning styles.
Okay.
Financial counseling services can also provide personalized guidance and support.
Right.
Helping individuals create budgets, manage debt, work towards those financial goals.
So it's about creating a network of support and resources
It is.
that's accessible to everyone.
Exactly. But, it's not just about government programs and educational initiatives.
Mhm.
We all have a role to play
Right.
in creating a more equitable society.
What are some things that individuals can do, even on a small scale?
Well, I think supporting Black-owned businesses is a great place to start.
Okay.
That directly injects capital into those communities
Right.
and helps foster economic growth.
Yeah, it's about being mindful
Mm-hmm.
of where we spend our money
Absolutely.
and who we support.
You can also seek out Black professionals.
Right.
Doctors, lawyers, accountants when you need those services.
That makes sense.
These small choices can really make a big difference.
What about engaging with our communities?
Yeah.
Are there ways to kind of get involved on a local level?
Absolutely. Volunteer your time or donate to organizations that are working to address the racial wealth gap.
Okay.
Support initiatives that promote affordable housing, educational equity, job creation within Black communities.
Mhm.
Attend town hall meetings, advocate for policies that promote racial justice and economic empowerment.
So it sounds like there are countless ways to make a difference,
There are.
whether it's through our spending habits,
Mm-hmm.
our volunteer efforts, or our political engagement.
Exactly. And, don't underestimate the power of just having a conversation.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Talking about these issues with friends, family, colleagues,
Mm-hmm.
it helps raise awareness.
Right.
And it can inspire others to take action.
Yeah, it really all comes back to that idea of collective action,
It does.
recognizing that we all have a part to play in this.
We do. And addressing the racial wealth gap requires a shift in mindset. A commitment to understanding the historical context,
Right.
acknowledging those systemic barriers that are still in place, and working together to create a more just and equitable future for everyone.
Well, this has been a really eye-opening conversation,
Good. I'm glad.
and I think we've only just begun to scratch the surface.
We have, but hopefully this has given our listeners a good starting point
Yeah, I hope so.
for continuing to learn and engage with this really critical issue.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
It's been a really thought-provoking conversation, and I hope that our listeners will continue to learn, reflect, and take action to address the racial wealth gap.
I hope so too.
So thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.